Hi, everybody. If you're joining us this morning, we're going to start in just a few more minutes. But if you want to put in the comments, we're going to be talking a lot about different animals today. And I'd love to know what your favorite animal is and why. We still have a few minutes until we get started, but if you're already logged on and watching, I want you to either think to yourself or type in the comments, what is your favorite animal and why? Or if there's someone watching with you, you can tell them and figure out what their favorite animal is. If you're just joining us, we're about to start in about 1 more minute, but you can either think to yourself or tell someone watching with you or tell in the comments, what is your favorite animal and why? And we're gonna get started really soon. Okay, so I think it's about time to get started. Go ahead and stop this. All right, well, hello everybody. My name is Jessica from the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in downtown Dallas, and I'm really excited to be talking with you all today. In just a minute, you're gonna meet my friend Kristen, who's gonna be talking to us about adaptations. So while we're getting started, see if you can remind yourself if you know what adaptations are, what you think they might be about, and then Ms. Kristen is going to talk to us about some awesome examples of them. Kristen, are you ready?
I am ready. I just want to, really quick before I start talking, I want to make sure that we can all use the chat. I'm going to ask a lot of questions today, and I'm going to ask you to make some observations about the specimens that I have around me. So if you can, make sure you have the chat open and you're ready to respond. As Jessica said, we're going to talk about an adaptation that an animal has that helps them to survive. So my first question for you is, what does an animal need to survive? There are a few things, so if you can think of one, drop it in the chat. I don't know if we have that. I'll give you a minute. Think about it. What does an animal need to survive? Or what do you need to survive? I know, it's a tough question, right? Could you live without your iPhone? It's possible. A lot of the things that animals need to survive include their food, water, shelter, protection, or to be able to protect themselves, things like air to breathe, and they find all of those things in their habitat or their home. But we're going to talk about the adaptations that help them to thrive and survive within that habitat. And an adaptation is something, their structural adaptation, something physical about their body that helps them to survive, or an adaptation can be something behavioral, an action or something that they do that can help them to survive as well. Now, Ms. Jessica at the very beginning asked you what your favorite animal was, or asked you to think about it. So we're going to start our chat today with one of my favorite animals. And that is the bullfrog. And what I'll do is I'm going to zoom in on my bullfrog, and I'm going to give you a second, probably a minute, make some observations about him. Think about what he looks like, what he might eat. How does he catch his food? How does he escape from predators? Okay, so let's talk about, what does a frog eat? Does anyone know? They eat insects. So they are technically considered a carnivore in this stage of their life because they eat insects. They're technically an insectivore. But whenever they're born, they're tadpoles, and they actually eat algae, which means that they're an herbivore. So it's pretty cool that they change throughout their life stages. Now, let me zoom out so you can see me too. It's kind of weird if I'm just talking and you can't see me. So here's our frog. One of the first things I noticed about what he eats is it's actually something he does, but you can't see it here. He has that long, sticky tongue to help him catch insects. And you can't see it, but it's there. It's just on the inside. But he's also got nice, sticky saliva that help him catch it as well. And then another adaptation they have is they actually don't have any teeth. So what they do is they actually use their eyeballs to help them swallow their food, which I know sounds really gross. But they actually, their eyeballs are not fixed into their skulls like ours are. And so what they do whenever they swallow is they actually push their eyeballs down into their mouths, and it pushes the food down their throats, which I think is really cool. They have, frogs actually have this nice sleek body where you can see some of the hip bones, and that's what's going to allow them to jump away. It's a way of protecting themselves, to hop away. And so they have these really powerful muscles here in their hips, and then they have these long legs as well. And their legs can even be larger than or longer than their head and their body combined, which is a pretty cool thing, I think. And bullfrogs can get up to be 18 inches, which is about 1.5 feet in length, up to. It's not the average, but they can get that large, and up to a pound, which is really large for a frog. They are amphibians, which means they spend part of their life in water and part of their life out of water. Bullfrogs are a more aquatic frog, so they're going to spend more of their time in water or right around the edge of the water. And they're able to absorb a lot of things through their skin. So their skin is actually really sensitive. We can see here on our frog that it's relatively smooth as well, which is really interesting because if we look at a toad, and I'll actually zoom in on him so you can see him. If we look at a toad, they actually have bumpy skin. Frogs tend to have more like smooth, shiny, moist skin because they need to be closer to a water source, where toad's skin is a little bit thicker and it has those bumps on it so they can venture a little bit farther from the water source. Toads also actually have shorter legs, so they're not quite as strong jumpers. They might hop or, you know, try to jump away, but they're not going to jump nearly as far as a frog would jump in order to escape. And then you can also see he doesn't have quite as athletic of a build as a frog does. So I think that's pretty interesting too. Some toads will actually secrete poison from these glands right behind their eyes. And that's what makes your dogs, if they ever pick up a toad, they start to like foam at the mouth. That's what makes your dog foam at the mouth. So it's that poison that's secreted. But they actually have another behavior that they do in order to keep predators from eating them, hopefully. And Miss Jessica learned this the hard way. The last time we did this program, we brought out a live toad, and the live toad was startled, and it actually peed all over Miss Jessica's computer. So we did learn that the hard way. So that's a behavioral adaptation. So they might urinate whenever they're scared. And it's hopefully that their urine will taste bad, and the animal that has them in their mouth will just drop it, and they can hop and, you know, crawl away. And frogs will do that as well. So do we have anything in the chat? Any questions about our frog or our toad? We talked about how they're insectivores, how they may hop or jump away from their prey or from their predator. I didn't talk about this, but they actually camouflage really well as well. Notice that brownish green tinge. They're going to camouflage with the water or with the mud and stuff on the edge of those lakes and streams and ponds. Talked about how they move. They do have nostrils in this stage of their life, but as tadpoles, they actually have gills that allow them to breathe underwater. So again, they go through something called metamorphosis, which is when their body changes its appearance during its lifespan. I don't see any questions in the chat about our frogs. Did you have any questions, Miss Jessica? Did you see them or did I miss them?
I don't see any, but maybe if you introduce our next animal, if you have questions about them, you can type it in ahead of time while Kristen is telling us all these cool facts. And that way you'll have a little extra time to type in your questions, and then we can get to them after our next animal, which I am really excited to find out what it is. I see some pretty cool critters there.
You have a preference, Miss Jessica?
I don't.
Okay, I'll pick. Let's do a possum.
So if you have a question about a possum, you can go ahead and start typing it in the chat, and let's learn some cool stuff about it.
So my question to you is the same thing. Make some observations about our possum, thinking about how they survive in their habitat. Do you think that, what are they eating? How are they collecting their food? How are they escaping from predators?
Small ears. A pretty small little nose and face too.
I think that's interesting that he brought up the nose and the face. They actually have a pretty good sense of smell, even though their nose looks relatively small. So I'm actually going to change our view really quick. Let's look at the skull of a possum. So here is their skull. Look at it from this side. They have this nice crest here where muscles can attach. Let's look specifically at their teeth. Okay, so their teeth can tell us a lot about what the animal eats. And so I want you to take a guess. Do you think the possum is a carnivore, an herbivore, or an omnivore? So we see that he has nice canines, but he also has some molars back here that are, they're not flat and they're not really like cup shaped, but they do have some definition to them. You can see how they change at the back. Possums are actually omnivores. So they'll eat both plants and meat. And we can see that because of those canines. They might use those to tear things off, like meat or fur or something. And then they'll chew it at the back using these molars that they have. Okay. Now let me switch the view back to our possum.
We had another comment about a big tail.
Yes, their tail, what's different about their tail though from the rest of their body? Someone mentioned in the comments that they're pretty furry, right? But their tail actually doesn't have a lot of fur on it. They can use this as a fifth limb, and it's called a prehensile tail. And what this means is that when they're climbing in trees or really moving at all or trying to hold on to something, they might use this to help them grip the tree as they're climbing. Now, you may have seen pictures of possums hanging upside down from the trees, and they can do this whenever they're young, whenever they're a juvenile. But once they get older, they get a little heavier, and their body is too heavy for their tail to support on its own. So if you do see a possum hanging upside down from the tree, it's probably pretty young. Now, talked about what he eats. Let's talk about, do you think he would be good at camouflage? Blending in with his environment? I don't think he would be great at camouflage, personally. But you never know, it depends on where he is, where he's hanging out, what he's doing. He might have some luck. Now, he is nocturnal. And what that means is he is awake in the evening. And one of the things you can't see here about his eyes is he has a structure inside of his eyes that helps him to see at night. And you might have noticed this if you were ever out at night and saw a possum, because it kind of seems, and you might have seen it in your cats or your dogs too, their eyes almost glow whenever you shine a light on them. And that's because there's a special surface at the back of the eye called the tapetum lucidum. And it kind of reflects that light and helps them to be able to bring more light into their eye so they can see really well at night and in the dark. And that's why their eyes glow. So far, what we've talked about are all physical adaptations, something on the body of the possum. What we haven't talked about is a behavior that they display. Can you think of something special that a possum does? I don't know if it's in the chat yet. I haven't seen it. Okay, haven't seen it yet. But have you ever heard of that saying where they're playing possum? Comes from the possum. What they do is they slow their breathing and they slow their heart rate so much that it almost seems like they're dead, but they're not. They're just pretending. They're hoping that if they're dead, other animals won't want them. And it's actually something that they can't control, kind of like our response to stimuli sometimes is called our fight or flight response, where you might try to protect yourself. You might put your hands up really quick if you're scared, or you might run the other direction. Similar response. They get scared or frightened or threatened in some way, and they can't control it. It just automatically happens within their body, and they just slow down and play dead. And then after they think that the threat has passed, they speed back up, get back up to normal, and scurry away. Unless, of course, they've been eaten by something, right? Now, we talked about how the tail can help them climb up the trees, but if we, I didn't mean to stop that. If we look at their feet are actually designed to help them climb up in those trees as well. So this is the front foot, and this is the back foot. You can look at the shape. It almost looks like they have an opposable thumb in a way. I think it's called a hallux, and that will help them to climb up in those trees. Possums have been really successful in our urban areas, one, because they're nocturnal, and two, because they'll eat just about anything. So we said that they're omnivores. That means that they'll eat nuts, berries. They might eat small insects and rodents. They might even eat our trash. So possums are true omnivores. They'll eat just about anything. Okay, so for the possum, again, I'll give you a moment if you have any questions to add those to the chat, or any comments. If I've missed something and you think you know, go ahead and add that as well. He's one of my favorites. He's a cutie. So I'll leave him here for just a moment, see if any questions pop up, and I'll think about the next animal. Do we have time for a vote, Miss Jessica?
I think we do.
Let's see. Let's do snake or owl. So if you would like to talk about the snake, you'd like to talk about my snake right here, type that in the chat. If you'd like to talk about the owl, type that in the chat. And again, if you have questions about the possum, type those in as well. We can always go back later. We'll see if anybody responds.
I'm responding.
You're responding? Uh-oh, now we have a tie.
Yes, Team Owl.
Okay, I see quite a few responses for the owl. So just like the other animals, I want you to make some observations about our owl. How does he get his food? What does he eat? How does he survive in his habitat and collect all of those things? Food, water, shelter. How does he protect himself? Okay. Let me grab a few more things while you're thinking about it. Oh yes, we will definitely do the snake next, don't worry. I feel like I've said this about all the animals, that they're all my favorite. I just like talking about all of them. They're so fun. So here, this is a great horned owl. And it might look pretty big, but they usually only get to about 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. They're pretty light. I think that's pretty interesting because, let me ask, why do you think it's important that they're so light? It has to do with how they get away from predators and how they hunt. So they're birds, right? They fly. And what they need in order to fly is to be pretty light. So they actually have hollow bones, or not, they're not quite hollow, but they have lighter structured bones than we do. So that contributes to a light weight. And then they also don't have fur, they have feathers instead. And these feathers are pretty light and it allows them to fly. So I said flight can be an adaptation to get away, to protect themselves, or it can be an adaptation for how they hunt their food. Owls are carnivores. They might eat things like little chipmunks or mice or even frogs, toads, or snakes, whatever's around. And they have a few adaptations that help them hunt other than flight. One of them is their eyes. They have really, really large eyes in comparison to their skull. So let me change this view and we'll look at their skull.
His eyes look almost the same size as your eyes.
Oh, do they? When I was next to him? So this is our skull of an owl. So we can see his beak. So I told you he was a carnivore. This curved beak is helpful for that. He's going to use that curve of the beak to help pull the meat and the fur off of the animal. But we were talking about his eyes. His eyes are very large if we look at the shape of and size of the whole skull, which I think is very interesting. And they're actually bell-shaped, which increases the surface area at the back of the eye and helps them to see even more. So that really helps them to hunt at night. They are nocturnal. And go back. They are nocturnal, they hunt at night. They need those big eyes so that as much light as possible is being allowed into their eyes, into their brain, so they can process the image. So it's another adaptation for hunting or flying in the evening. Another one I hadn't talked about yet is their sense of smell. Owls actually have a terrible sense of smell. And it's often joked about that one of their favorite meals is actually skunk because they can't smell it. They don't know how bad it smells, which I think is pretty cool. And then let's see, you might be thinking that these little tufts of fur, or not fur, tufts of feathers are actually their ears, but they are not. Owls have special ears designed for how they hunt their prey. So if we think about how they hunt, they are going to perch themselves on a branch in a tree, and they are going to sit and wait. And they might use their eyes to listen. They're going to use their ears. They use their eyes to listen. They use their eyes to see. They use their ears to listen for any animals that are scurrying around on the bottom of the floor, the ground, right? And what they do is once they hear it, their hearing is so great that they can tell exactly where it is. And what they do is they swoop down, use their talons to collect it and bring it back up to safety, where they feel safe so they can eat. So one of the ways their ears are adapted is that, can you see both my hands? Okay. Is that your ears are symmetrical. They're in the same spot on both sides of your head. But for owls, their ears are actually asymmetrical, which means one is a little higher than the other. And it's almost like surround sound. So on one side, they can hear up and around, and on the other side, they can hear down and around. So it gives them the ability to hear what's above and below them. So it's another adaptation for hunting, which I think is super cool. It's almost, like I said, it's almost like surround sound. It's amazing. I mentioned their talons for hunting and kind of grabbing their prey. Let's take a closer look at their feet. So I have their track that's right here. What we can see is they have 3 digits that come forward and a 4th one that comes back. And what that does is it allows them to kind of grab onto the branches or onto their prey as they're swooping down to collect it. So it's pretty cool. And then they have those nice sharp claws as well, and that will help them to hold on to the branches as well. Let me think. We talked about how it eats, what it eats, talked about how it hunts, talked about flight and movement. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is birds make nests, but owls are opportunistic nesters, which means that they don't make their own nest. What they do is they take over a nest that's been left empty. So it's pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of efficient. They're not taking the time to build the nest. They're just taking over something that's already been built by another animal. Oh, there's one more thing I needed to cover. That's why I still had it on that view. There's a myth that owls can turn their heads all the way around, but they cannot. What they can do, so if here's our owl head right here, and this is looking forward straight ahead. What they can do, they cannot turn their head all the way around like this, or even do like that. They can't do either of those. What they do is they can actually turn their head this direction and this direction. But what ends up happening is that it's only about 3/4 of a circle, or 270 degrees. So it is not a full 360 degrees. What you cannot see is how they're able to do that. We have 7 bones in our neck, 7 bones right about here. Okay. Owls have up to 14 bones in their necks and extra blood vessels that allow them to turn their heads farther than we can. So it's pretty cool. One of the limitations, though, is they can't move their eyes. So if I'm looking at the screen, you can see it. But if I look to my left or I look to my right without moving my head, you can see that my eyeballs are moving. And owls can't technically move their eyeballs around like that. So they have to be able to move their heads. So I think that's a pretty cool adaptation as well. Ms. Jessica, any questions?
Not right now, but we did have a few people know that that was a myth and not true.
It's so cool. I love it. So I will give you another moment. If you have any observations, questions, anything I missed about the owl, let me know. And as promised, we will do the snake next. So again, same process as before. Here is our snake. Make some observations about our snake. Think about how he or she might survive in their habitat. I know a lot of people do not like snakes, and that's absolutely fine. Again, I think snakes are really fascinating. And I think a lot of people just don't necessarily understand what's going on, because I used to be terrified of them too. Don't worry. But as I learned more about them, I respect them. They're pretty darn cool, if I say so myself. Okay, so here is a Western diamondback rattlesnake. Okay, now, oh, okay. The first comment I see is that the bottom of the tail is different than the rest of the body. Okay, and you're right, it is. And I will talk about that in a little bit. Let's start at the top and work our way down. So don't let me forget it. Okay, so let's look at, let me see if I can zoom in really well on his face. Okay, so here is the face of our rattlesnake. And one of the things that I first observe are the fangs that he has. So this snake, the rattlesnake, is a venomous snake. And what happens when a rattlesnake bites something is that venom comes out of these fangs that are here and is injected into the body of their prey. Now, if we look at the shape of the fangs, they're kind of like pointed backwards in a way, kind of like this. Why do you think that they would have teeth that are pointed backwards? What purpose do you think that would serve? Let me see if I can show you a better example. Okay, we'll see if it'll work. So here is the skull of a rattlesnake. And I know that you only see two fangs in the other one, and here you see multiple. It's because every once in a while they might lose it and it grows in a new one. So those are just kind of like replacements. But their teeth are curved backwards because snakes don't have any hands to hold food in their mouth. So if they catch something, they're going to swallow it whole. But say that prey was in their mouth and it was trying to wiggle out, right? What's going to happen is they'll get stuck by those fangs again. So it's an adaptation to help keep the food within its mouth. Another adaptation they have for eating is that their jaws back here are actually very loosely attached to each other. And so they have the ability to expand the size of their throat in order to swallow their food, which I think is super cool. They have other adaptations that allow them to breathe while they're swallowing their food because the food can be relatively large. Now, rattlesnakes are also a pit viper, which means they have a special organ that can sense heat. And so that's how they know if an animal is alive or dead or which way to go for catching their prey. And they are carnivores, if I haven't said that already. They might eat little mice, rodents. I guess if you had a toad or a frog, something small like that. The other thing I didn't mention, you cannot see it on this example, but they have a tongue and they do that behavior where they kind of like stick it out and bring it back in, right? And what they're doing is they're smelling the atmosphere, the air around them. And it's forked to increase the surface area of the tongue. And what will happen is they can tell if there's a nice furry little mouse on one side and an apple on the other. And what they'll do is they'll say, well, I don't want an apple, I'm a carnivore. So they'll know which direction to move and go towards the mouse whenever they're hunting. Now, just like us, snakes shed their skin, because if I do this, I'm shedding skin. But they don't do it like we do. They do it all at one time. So if we look, I can show you the shed of a snake. Now this shed is not from a rattlesnake. This is probably from our ball python. But what's interesting is that they shed the skin even over their eyelids. So this is where the head was, and you can see where the eyelids are. So they shed the skin from their entire body all at one time. They vary in how often they shed. So these are the belly scales versus the top. So the difference in the scales. And how often they shed varies on the conditions that they're in, if it's very dry, if they're growing a lot. It really just depends. There's a lot of factors there on how often they shed. Now, I don't really know why the pattern is different at the tip of the tail for the rattlesnake. On the Western diamondback rattlesnake, I don't know if it has something to do with camouflage or bringing your eyes to the rattle. I don't really know the purpose of that coloration right there. But they do have this rattle on the end, which a lot of people know about. And rattlesnakes have a bad reputation of, you know, being pretty scary animals. But it's actually pretty nice that they have this rattle. So I said that the snakes will shed their skin all at once every so often. On a rattlesnake, the last little bit of shed doesn't actually fall off. It actually becomes one of these little lobes on the rattle. So there is a myth that you can tell how old a rattlesnake is by how many lobes are on the rattle. And that's not true. It's as often as they shed. And even then, some of the top ones will fall off over time. So you can't tell how old they are. Can't even tell how many times they've shed just based on the rattle. But it's the behavior that they do with the rattle that's really important. Snakes are not offensive animals. They're not attacking humans or biting humans just because they want to. If they bite a human, it's because they feel threatened by us. And so what's important about the rattle is that if you're ever out and you hear that shaking sound, that rattling noise that they make, they shake their tail up to 60 times per second. So it can be pretty noticeable while you're out. That's actually a warning for you as a human. You should hear it and think, okay, that means there's a rattlesnake nearby. He's threatened by me. I'm invading his personal bubble and I should probably leave. But what you don't want to do is run into the rattlesnake. So my advice is just to pause for a second, listen, try to figure out which direction the rattle noise is coming from, and then go in the opposite direction. Okay, let me think. I think I covered just about everything except if snakes have skeletons. Do you think a snake has a skeleton, or do you think they're boneless? All right, here is your answer. Snakes have skeletons. Just like us, they have ribs, except for their ribs are modified to go all the way down their bodies, almost all the way into their tail. And they have this backbone just like we do. And then their skull is at the top. Now, does anyone have any questions about snakes? I'll give you just a moment. They tend to be something that I get questions about. One of the questions I'll anticipate is, I told you he was venomous, but some people will have a question about poison versus venom. And poison and venom are both toxic to humans, or they can be toxic to humans, but it's about how it enters the body. So I mentioned the toad and how they secrete poison, and it might cause your dogs to foam at the mouth whenever they pick up a toad. And that's because a poison is something that you ingest, so something that you eat, or you can absorb it through your skin by touching certain things, like poison ivy. Rattlesnakes are venomous, though. And venom gets into your body through the fangs. So it's injected into your body. So that's the difference between poison and venom. I kind of think about it when I tell the difference with the story of Snow White. Snow White is poisoned by an apple, and she doesn't get poisoned by the apple until she eats it, and that's what makes her fall asleep. So I always remember that whenever I think of poison. It's something that you eat, but you can also absorb it through your skin. I'm not 100% sure if they will try to chase a human that's going in the opposite direction. I don't think they would, but it's not a question that I know right now. And I know it's probably a terrible thing to say that I don't know, but What I will do after this program is go look it up so that I can answer that question better the next time. And I really do encourage all of you to look up the questions if you had them and I wasn't able to answer them. Go look them up. You'll find out a lot of really cool things that you didn't know, even just looking up one thing. You'll find a lot of different facts and tangents to go down, and it's really cool. Do I have time? Oh, is venom when you get bit by it? Yes, so venom is what is released through those fangs into the body. And then poison is what you absorb through your skin or you ingest. So they're both toxic and both harmful to humans. It's just how they get into our body that's the difference.
We have 5 minutes left, so I think we have time for you to teach us one more thing.
Okay, I actually want to do something different. I don't want to talk about an animal per se, but I want to talk about I want to review some of the animals that we talked about already. So as a scientist or a biologist, or even if you're going out hiking, you're not going to see all of the animals that live in that habitat or that ecosystem. But what you will find are some of the things that animals leave behind, and that includes their scat. Do you know what scat is? I'm going to switch my video, bring some things out for you. I'm wondering if people know what scat is. Any guesses yet? So we talked about really like 4 animals today. We talked about the possum. We talked about a snake. We talked about an owl. And we talked about, we'll say a toad, okay? And each one of these pieces of scat belongs to one of those animals. And so I'm going to talk about their scat. It's something that everyone leaves behind, okay? Now, let's start with this one. I think this one's the easy one. Who do you think would poop in the trees out of the 4 animals that we talked about today? It is our great horned owl. Now, whenever they swallow their prey or eat their prey, some of the stuff that they swallow, like bones and fur, is their body can't digest it. So what happens is they spit up an owl pellet. And so that may be what you're thinking about, is the owl pellet. And whenever they spit up all that solid stuff that they can't digest, their scat ends up being pretty liquid. So this is our owl scat. So that leaves 3 left. We have a snake, we have a toad, and we have our possum. Let's do this one. So this is our toad scat. And if you look pretty closely at it, we can see that there are insects inside the scat. So you can see an exoskeleton of an insect right about there. So we know that our toads are insectivores. Yeah. And they don't poop very often, so that's why it's pretty large. So that I get that question. Why is it so big? Toads are small. They just don't poop very often. Next. Let's see. Show you this one. Let me open this. What do you see? Now there's 2 pieces here. And they're from the same animal, just at different times. So if we look in this one, there's actually berries or seeds from berries. And then in this one, you can see that there's some fur kind of coming out along the edges. So this animal was probably an omnivore. Do you remember what animal we talked about today that was an omnivore? It was our possum. So this is the scat of a possum. And what's in the scat might vary with what they're eating. So here we have seeds. So depending on what they're eating, their scat might contain something different. And that leaves our snake. This is scat from a snake. Snakes are carnivores, so you may see some fur or bones come out within this as well. But what's the most distinguishable to me is that it has this whitish colored stuff and the brown colored stuff. And snakes, they don't go to the restroom very often. And so what they do is they hold on to their urine and it becomes concentrated. And the urine is actually the white stuff that's in this scat. And then the brown stuff would be the food that they ate. And when they go to the bathroom, they just release it all at the same time. Okay, I don't think anyone had any questions. And I think I'm about a minute over, so I apologize for that. But if you have any questions, just let us know. We'll be happy to get back to you whenever we can. Ms. Jessica, do you have anything to wrap up with? Anything that I missed?
I don't. I think we are about ready for our lunch break right after our lovely scat chat. So you're closing us out with that.
It was so fun talking with you guys today. I hope you had a lot of fun. And again, I encourage you, if there was a question that I didn't answer or couldn't answer, go look it up, do a little research. You'll have so much fun learning about these, and then every animal will be your favorite. All right. Bye.